In this lesson, I want to discuss the power of self-awareness and why it's critical for building good habits. And to do that, I'd like to share two stories. The first is about a biologist named Luis Agassiz, and he really enjoyed teaching his students through the power of observation. So one postgraduate student that he had, for example, he brought him in and he said, all right, the first task I want you to do is to figure out everything about this sunfish. So he gave him a sunfish to observe. And the students sat down and looked at the fish for like an hour, wrote down what it looked like, the color of it, how its scales were shaped. And after about an hour, the student thought, I have this pretty much mastered. And so he waited for his teacher to return. But the teacher didn't return that day. So then the next day, he waited for his teacher to return. And again, he didn't return. And the student started thinking, all right, I guess I'm supposed to look at this a little bit deeper. So he looked at it some more. And again, for the whole first week, the teacher didn't return. The student just looked at the fish day after day and tried to observe anything new about it. And after about 100 hours or so, the student came back to the teacher and showed him everything that he had written down. And Agassiz said, no, it's not good enough, and walked away. And so the student was really frustrated at this point, and so he decided to double down on his efforts. So for the next week, he spent 10 hours a day looking at the fish. And after a week of 10 hours each day writing it, he came back, and finally, after all of this observation, hundreds of hours, he handed his teacher the description, and Agassiz said, these results astonish. And his point is that only by looking at something deeply, much more deeply than just surface level, much more deeply than just, oh, whatever comes up as our first thought, only then do we truly observe what something is like and the facets and different aspects of it. So that's the first story. Keep that power of observation in mind. The second story is about a man named René Laennec, who was a Frenchman, and he was a physician. And on his way to the office one day, he saw two little boys playing with a wooden plank that had a nail on the end, or a pin. And the one kid was just plucking the pin. The other kid had his ear to the other side of the plank, listening to the noise travel down the wooden board. And Laennec was struck by something. He said, I remember there's this property of materials that if you put your ear up to a physical object that's touching something that is making a sound, you can hear the vibration through that object. And so when he got to the doctor's office that day, he took a little piece of paper, rolled it up, and put it against his patient's chest. And he was astonished to hear the heartbeat of the patient. And for the first time ever, Laennec had invented a stethoscope. And so he took this piece of paper and he ended up upgrading it into a wooden tube. And over the course of the next 100 years, it ended up revolutionizing medicine. Because for the first time, physicians could actually hear what was going on inside the patient's body. They had a way of measuring what was actually happening. And this is where these two stories come together. If we take the idea that we need to observe our habits deeply, to pay attention, to be self-aware, not just in a surface level way, but in a very critical way, then we can start to understand what actually is going on. But only if we have a way of measuring what's happening. If we have a way of looking inside, the way that a stethoscope gives an uninterrupted view of what's happening inside the patient's body, we need an uninterrupted view of what's happening with our habits and behaviors. We need to observe them deeply, but we need to measure them closely. And so, for example, we say that we want to build better exercise habits, but we don't actually track how often we go to the gym. We say that we want to eat more healthy consistently, but we don't actually track whether or not we're sticking to healthy meals. We say that we want to meditate on a consistent basis, but we don't actually track whether or not that happens. We say that we want to stick to better habits for work and our career, but we don't actually measure our progress in any tangible way. And so we need methods and tools for actually sticking to this and measuring and tracking our behavior over the long run. In some of the coming lessons, I'll discuss strategies like the paperclip strategy and the Seinfeld strategy that help you do this, that actually help us measure and be self-aware about the habits we're sticking to and the habits that we're not sticking to. And if you can embrace this philosophy of self-experimentation, deep observation, and measurement, then you'll find that those tools in themselves are often all you need to build better habits and behaviors.